Every corner of this house is known to me the way a man knows his own body. I sit at that window now in the wheelchair, watching the light drift across the floorboards the way it has for years. My hands lie still on the armrests. Big scarred carpenter's hands that have cleaved timber and turned screws and worked rough surfaces down to smooth for more than 4 decades. They look no different than they ever did. Welcome to Honor Revenge Stories, where the people who were written off have the last word. If stories like this one find you right where you are, I'd be glad if you hit subscribe and passed it along to someone who needs to hear it today. Before we go further, have you ever had someone in your own family treat you like a problem to be managed, rather than a person to be loved? Drop a yes or no in the comments. I'd genuinely like to know. One more thing, some details in this story have been shaped for the purpose of telling it clearly, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is coincidental. What is not fictional is the truth underneath it. Everything else about me is what shifted. Before I get to what my son told me, before I get to the recording, the camera footage, and that December afternoon when what had long been hidden finally broke open, I have to talk about this house first. The house is where the whole thing took root. You need to know what it meant to me before you can begin to understand what it meant to them. My name is Walter Crane, 68 years old, 41 years swinging tools as a carpenter in Akron, Ohio. I have never been a man who reached easily for words. Lorene, my ex-wife, had a line she used. She said I did my talking in wood. She had that right. The day Eddie came into the world, I built him a crib from yellow pine. His 5th birthday, I built him a bookshelf shaped like a lighthouse. At 10, when the dark kept him awake and fear had its grip on him, I built a lamp out of reclaimed fence posts, wired it with my own hands, and angled it, so a warm glow spread across his ceiling the way dawn does. Saying the words, "I love you," never came naturally to me, but being there that I could do without fail. I was there every time it counted. "Dad, can I help?" 8 years old Eddie in his pajamas at the garage door on a Saturday morning, eyes still half shut, watching me at the bench. I had a piece of walnut clamped to the bench and was drawing a hand plane along the grain ear, tuned for the pitch that meant the angle was true. "Come here," I said. He shuffled over in his socks. I wrapped my hands over his on the plane and walked him through one slow, steady stroke. The shaving peeled away in one clean ribbon. Eddie's face opened up like I'd pulled a coin from behind his ear. "That's how you know it's right," I told him, "when it comes off just like that. Nothing grabbing, nothing fighting, just clean." He took that in with a nod, the way a kid does when he's filing something away for keeps. He probably was. Eddie was built that way, serious about what he cared about, fiercely loyal, always taking stock. In those days, I was something he cared about. He used to watch me the way a young man watches someone he wants to grow into. I put this house up in 1981, 2 years before Eddie was born, on a half-acre lot west of Akron. Foundation went in on a Monday in April. 11 months passed before I stopped working on it. My father drove up from West Virginia for 2 weeks to help get the walls framed. My buddy Bert from 3 houses down showed up with beer and a nail gun and gave me his weekends through most of that summer. Whatever I couldn't handle myself, I covered with overtime money from the shop. Sandwiches every day for a year. That was lunch because every dollar I could spare was going into materials. Lorene walked through the completed house on a February afternoon in 1982, her fingers trailing along the walls, pulling open the kitchen cabinets, and then she stopped in the middle of the living room with tears moving down her face. "Walter," she said, "you built us a home." "That's what I do," I told her. She laughed and shook her head like I was arriving late to the actual meaning. Maybe I was. But here's what I understood. All of it, the feeling I carried, the things I had no sentences for, was standing right there before her in 2,000 square feet of plaster hardwood and tight joinery. That was my tongue. That was how love came out of me. Eddie grew up moving through those rooms. He took his first steps on that floor, came off the porch steps once and tore up his knee, and I cleaned it and bandaged it, and he went quiet for maybe 30 seconds before he turned around and ran straight back at those steps again. Every night until he was 17, he sat at the kitchen table to do his schoolwork. At 18, he brought his first girlfriend home for dinner and held himself so stiff in his chair, I nearly felt something for the kid. Nearly. My pride in him during those years was the kind a quiet man carries silently in excess, mostly when his son wasn't standing in front of him. Now, I sit at this window in the chair, and Eddie is somewhere else in this house, and whatever I feel when I think about my son isn't something I can pin a clean word to anymore. Not hate, I want to say that clearly. because hatred isn't something I come to quickly, and I'm not about to begin now. But something has moved into the space in my chest where that uncomplicated pride once lived, and it pushes against my ribs each time I hear his steps in the hallway. Comprehension, maybe. The quiet devastation that comes with finally comprehending something. Because these past several months, I've been learning things about my son that I spent 40 years before that turning away from. Not for lack of evidence, the evidence was there. But a father who has raised up everything he loves, board by board, will go right on looking at his work and seeing its finest form long after any honest craftsman would have admitted the job was flawed. I put my tools down some time back. What I uncovered when I did changed the shape of everything. My hands are resting on the armrests of this wheelchair. These same hands that built each room in this house, that carried Eddie from the car to his bed on long drives home, that guided his grip on a wood plane one morning in the garage and let him hear what a true cut sounds like. These hands pulled his son back from the edge 3 months ago. What came after that? What Eddie said to me, what Sonia did, and what I made sure to record while they were convinced I had no fight left, that's the story you're about to hear. At 22, Eddie moved out with a truck I had gone over myself and a toolbox I'd put together from my own supply. I stood on the porch and watched that truck roll back down the drive, and what I felt was the particular loneliness of a man who has finished what he set out to do, who has brought someone up all the way to the point of not needing him, and is left in the stillness that follows. I told myself it was how things were meant to be. Sons go, fathers stand there. That's the arrangement. What I failed to reckon with was that Eddie would keep turning back up. Not in the way a man hopes, not the Sunday meals, the help cleaning, gutters the easy closeness of a family that is spread out but held together. He came back carrying trouble, which I could have lived with if the trouble had ever run dry. The first time was 2017. He rang on a Tuesday night, and I could tell before he strung 4 words together, that clenched quality in his voice that comes when someone has been sitting on something bad for too long. "I got let go, Dad," he said. Budget cuts, they told him. Not performance-related, they said. But he wasn't sure. Either way, things were tight. How tight, I asked. He told me. I didn't flinch, though. The figure was larger than I'd braced for. "Okay," I said. "Give me the account number." "Dad, I'm not asking you to—" "I know you're not asking," I said. "Give me the number, Eddie." He gave it to me. I moved the money over that same night. He thanked me twice, and then we spent 10 minutes talking about baseball, because neither of us had the stamina to stay inside the harder conversation any longer than we had to. That was all right. That was how we were. The second time came in 2019. New job, same call, same voice, just a little more frayed at the edges. "I hate having to ask again," he said. He sounded genuinely ashamed this time, and I respected that. "Then stop calling it asking," I said. "Call it what it is, family. Sonia thinks we ought to be sorting this out on our own." "Sonia's not wrong that you should be," I said. "But you're not managing it right now, and I'm your father, so this is what's going to happen." The money went over. We didn't get to baseball this time. The silence that came up between us had a different weight to it than the first. Heavier, not the quiet of 2 men without words, but the quiet of a man understanding that something between himself and his father had tilted in a way he wasn't glad about. He let it sit without naming it. So did I. Sonia came into the picture officially in 2016, though Eddie had been dropping her name for close to a year before he brought her through the front door. She was sharp, that was what hit me first. Sharp in the eyes, sharp in the smile, the kind of person whose attention made you feel cataloged, even as she was saying something kind about you. I didn't take a dislike to her, I want to be honest about that. In those first years, I had no real problem with Sonia. The first time she came through the front door, she did what people do when a place is new to them, took in the ceilings, let her eyes move across the floors, studied the trim around the windows. Then she turned to me and said, "What a beautiful house, Dad. All this space." She called me Dad in the first few minutes of our first meeting. Some people would have read that as warmth. What I read was the speed of it, the ease like a decision had been made before she ever stepped inside. "I built it myself," I told her. Took close to 11 months. Her gaze drifted back across the living room. "It must have gone up considerably in value," she said. "This neighborhood." I looked over at Eddie. He was watching Sonia like she'd just said something charming. Maybe she had from where he stood. "I don't think of it in those terms," I said. She gave me a perfectly pleasant smile and steered us toward dinner. By 2021, I had handed Eddie just over $47,000 across 4 separate transfers. And that's not counting the weekends I'd put in at his place, fixing plumbing, patching drywall, relaying a section of a kitchen floor a contractor had botched. I never sent him a bill, never raised the subject over a meal. In the back of an old address book, I kept a running note not to hold it above him, but the way a tradesman logs his materials. For the record, in case it ever came to mean something. It came to mean something. One evening the autumn, Eddie and Sonia had come for dinner, and Caleb, not yet a year old, was sleeping in the portable crib I'd set up in the guest room. I came out of the kitchen and pulled up short. Sonia was near the window, holding her phone at an angle I recognized the angle of someone framing a shot. She was photographing the room, the ceiling height, the crown molding the original built-in shelving along the east wall. "Just sending something to my sister," she said quickly, lowering the phone and giving me a smile. Her voice didn't shift in the slightest. "She's into interior design. I was telling her about your work." "Sure," I said. I went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter with both hands flat on the surface, waiting for the feeling in my chest to settle enough that I could name it. It wasn't quite suspicion, more the sensation I'd get in the shop when a board looked clean on the outside but felt wrong under the plane, a density that didn't match, a grain hiding something. I didn't say anything to Eddie that night. I couldn't have told you exactly why, except that I wasn't ready to put words to something I had no proof of yet. After dinner, Eddie helped clear the table the way he always had when he came over. We were side by side loading the dishwasher, and without looking up, he said, "You all right, Dad? You're quiet tonight." "I'm always quiet," I told him. He laughed that real easy laugh of his, the one that had been the same since he was a teenager. For just a moment, he was only my son, again standing in my kitchen, in his socks, and the $47,000, and the photograph, and the accumulated heaviness of the last few years receded for a beat. "Thanks for dinner," he said. "And for, everything." "That's what fathers do," I said. He nodded and headed back to the table for more dishes. I stood watching him, this 40-year-old man who carried his mother's jaw and my hands and his own tangled heart, and felt love and worry pushing against each other in my chest with no clean way out. I didn't know, standing there, what was already being set in motion. Didn't know what Eddie and Sonia had begun discussing when I wasn't around, or what that photograph was actually for. But I kept the address book where it was in the back of my desk drawer. And I'm glad I did, because there came a morning much later when what was written there carried more weight than anything I could have spoken aloud. None of what followed would be intelligible without Caleb. So, before I move any deeper into the hard stretch of this story, I need to tell you about the mornings, because for nearly a year and a half, the mornings were the best thing I had. It began in March of 2023, when Caleb was 5 months old, and both Eddie and Sonia returned to their full work schedules. Sonia's sales position had her at the office bus 8:30. Eddie's commute ran 40 minutes each way. Daycare, they said, wasn't in reach right now. Would I be willing to help? I was retired. I had a wood shop out back, a vegetable garden that asked maybe an hour of me each day, and nothing else with a claim on my time. I told them I was happy to do it. What I kept to myself was what happened the first Monday morning in March when Eddie set that baby in my arms. Caleb's head warm against my chest, that tiny fist closed around my thumb, and something in me that had been shut a long time opened back up. Bert Keaton, my neighbor of 30 years, a retired postal carrier from the house 3 doors east, built like a man who spent decades walking Ohio winters, was out in his yard the next morning when I came onto the porch with Caleb. Bert is 70 years old, and he has a gift for landing exactly the right thing in exactly the right number of words. He looked at the two of us and called out, "You look about 20 years younger, Walter. Feel it." I called back that I did, and I meant it. "What's his name?" "Caleb." Bert broke into a wide grin, the kind that took over his whole face. "Good name, strong name. Bring him over when he's not quite so fragile looking." I laughed out loud, the kind of laugh that climbs up from deep in the chest. I couldn't recall the last time one like that had come out of me. The routine found its shape the way good routines do, without forcing. Eddie would turn into the driveway at 6:50 sometimes, 6:45 if Sonia was running ahead of schedule. He'd come in through the side door, I always left it unlocked, and hand Caleb over in whatever condition the morning had turned him out. In sometimes wide awake and taking everything in, sometimes still drowsy in his zip-up suit, blinking at the kitchen light, like it had done him some personal wrong. "He ate at 5:30, Eddie would say, already reaching for his jacket. He'll probably go back down around 9. There are 2 extra diapers in the bag and the, what do you call it? The giraffe teether. He likes that one. And then Eddie was out the door, keys going, and I'd hear the truck reverse down the drive, and the morning would open up and belong to Caleb and me. Those hours had a weight and texture I can still feel if I let myself go quiet. The solid warmth of him in the crook of my arm. The way he'd take hold of my finger and squeeze with a gravity that made me want to laugh and grieve at the same time. We'd settle in the front room while the early light came through the east window, the same light I mentioned before, and I'd talk to him the way you talk to someone who isn't speaking yet but is plainly listening. "That floor right there," I'd tell him, pointing down at the hardwood. "Your great-grandfather helped me lay that. He drove up from West Virginia in a truck older than your dad and worked 2 solid weeks without a word of complaint. That's who you want to be, Caleb, the kind who shows up." He'd study my face while I talked, those dark eyes tracking every shift of expression, with a concentration that seemed like too much for someone still needing help at mealtimes. On warmer mornings, I'd carry him out to the backyard, the vegetable garden, the wood shop, the old oak at the back fence that had been standing longer than the house. That tree was here before I was. I told him one morning in July, and his small hand reached out and pressed against the bark, and I felt my throat close in a way I hadn't seen coming. He said "Papa" for the first time on a Thursday in September of 2023. We were sitting on the kitchen floor. I'd lowered myself down to his level, which my knees made me pay for, but was worth every bit of it, and he'd been going through his usual babble when he suddenly fixed his eyes on me and said it twice clear as a bell. "Papa." I sat the rest of the way down on that kitchen floor and pulled him against my chest, and my eyes burned so hard I had to press them shut. I barely held it together, didn't want to scare him with a weeping old man, but my shoulders shook once and I let them. That's right, I managed to get out. "That's right, buddy." Bert heard the story over the fence the next morning and got a little misty himself, though he'd deny that until his dying day. Papa Bert repeated, shaking his head slowly. "You earned that, Walter. Don't go making it into something I said. I'm not making it into anything. I'm saying what it is." The drop-offs shifted over time in ways I clocked but never mentioned. In the early months, Eddie would sometimes come in for a few minutes, pour himself a cup of coffee, ask how I was getting on, share something funny from work. By the spring of 2024, he was through the door and back out in under 3 minutes, phone already in his hand on the way in. Sonia stopped coming inside altogether. She'd pull up to the curb and Eddie would carry Caleb in while she sat in the passenger seat scrolling her phone. One evening near the end of July, Sonia showed up to collect Caleb 2.5 hours late. No call, no message of any kind. I'd fed him dinner from the jar of applesauce I kept in the cupboard for exactly this kind of situation. Got him bathed in the little inflatable tub in the kitchen sink, then settled him down on the fold-out mat in the guest room. When she knocked and I opened the door, her eyes went straight past me toward the back of the house. "Is he asleep?" "He is," I said. I tried calling and my phone was on silent. She moved inside, already heading toward the guest room. "Sorry, Dad. It was just a wild day." She scooped Caleb up, carefully settled him against her shoulder, grabbed the bag I'd packed, and was at the door. She was halfway down the porch steps when she stopped and turned back. "He was fine, right?" she said. "Not thank you. Not, I'm sorry for going dark, just..." "Was he fine?" "He was fine," I said. She gave a nod and walked to the car. I stood in the doorway until the taillights rounded the corner and disappeared. The feeling that moved through me I can only describe as a cold draft through an open window, the kind that tells you there's a gap somewhere that has no business being there. I went inside and worked through the dinner dishes and let my mind go quiet, but that chill stayed with me all the way to bed. I didn't know yet that the mornings were numbered, didn't know that one unremarkable Saturday afternoon, everything my days had been built around would unravel in the time it takes to cross a room. Looking back, I can put my finger on the specific moments where the unease began. A sentence that cut off too fast, a look exchanged and smoothed over the particular way a person smiles when they've landed on a decision they have no plans to share. I missed every one of them at the time, not from carelessness, but because I trusted the people behind those signs. And trust is the one tool in a man's kit that temporarily puts out his eyes. It was August of 2024 when things began in earnest. Or more precisely, August was when I started noticing what had likely been building well before that. Eddie and Sonia had been living in the house for 6 months by then. They'd moved in the previous February when their apartment lease ended, and the plan had been temporary. 3 months, maybe 4. We were 8 months in, and nobody had raised the subject of moving out again. The first thing I noticed was the whispering. Not constantly, but at specific moments when I came down the stairs earlier than they expected or came in from the backyard through the side door. The kitchen would go quiet in that particular way it does when two people have just cut short a conversation they didn't want heard. Eddie would reach for his coffee mug. Sonia would turn back toward the counter, and one of them would toss out something ordinary. "Did you check the forecast, or is it supposed to rain?" in a voice pitched just a notch too casual. One evening in early August, I came in from the wood shop and found them at the kitchen table. Eddie had a yellow legal pad in front of him, covered in figures, and Sonia had her laptop open to what looked like a real estate listing. The moment I came through the side door, Sonia's hand shot out to close the laptop so fast that her elbow caught her water glass, and she grabbed it just before it went over. "Oh, sorry," I said, though. "I couldn't have told you what I was apologizing for. Didn't mean to come up on you." "You didn't," Sonia said with a smile as smooth as finished oak. "We were just going over some budget stuff. Boring house things." Eddie folded the legal pad in half. "You hungry, Dad? I was about to order pizza." "I'm fine," I said. I crossed to the sink, washed my hands, and looked out at the backyard, aware of the two of them behind me, quietly reassembling into something ordinary. I should have spoken up right then. I know that now. Bert came around on a Saturday morning about a week later. We have a standing arrangement when the weather holds back. Porch coffee put the world in order, which mostly means we argue about baseball and compare complaints about our knees. He came through the gate that morning, with his mug already in hand and an expression I'd learned to read across 3 decades of friendship. "I need to tell you something," he said, settling into the other porch chair. "And I want you to hear it before you decide how you feel about it." That's a concerning way to start, Bert. "Yeah. Well," he turned his mug slowly in both hands. 10 days ago, Tuesday morning, I was out front doing yard work, and there was a man I'd never seen before parked in front of your house. Suit clipboard. He walked the front of the property, looked up at the roof line, wrote something down. My chest tightened. Could be anybody. "Utility company." I went over and asked him, Bert said. He told me he was just looking around. That exact phrase, just looking around. Then he got in his car and left. Bert held my gaze. I got his plate number. Walter the Cold Draft again. That same cold draft. "Why didn't you call me?" I said, "I'm calling you now." Bert set his mug down. I didn't want to stir things up if it was nothing. But then 2 days later, I saw Eddie out front on the phone pointing at the house. He paused. Not toward the street. At the house itself. I set my coffee down because I didn't trust my hands to stay steady. Now, Bert said, choosing his words, "Maybe I've got the wrong read on this. Maybe it's all nothing. But you've been my neighbor since 1988. And I know what your face looks like when something's eating at you. And it's been wearing that look for about a month." I told him about the legal pad, about the laptop Sonia had shut too fast, about the conversations that dried up the moment I walked into a room. Bert listened with the attentive quiet of a man who'd spent 30 years delivering other people's mail and figured out that what people most wanted to hide was usually right there in plain sight if you paid attention. "Have they said anything about the house?" he asked, "about selling or moving on?" Eddie asked me last week whether I'd ever thought about downsizing. The words felt strange coming out like something I'd been carrying around unsaid. Bert's eyebrows rose. "What did you tell him?" I told him I wasn't going anywhere, that we all lived here. "What did he say?" He said he was just thinking out loud. Bert picked up his mug and let his eyes move across the yard, the vegetable garden, the wood shop, the oak tree at the back fence. He had the look of a man who'd already reached his conclusion and was weighing how hard to push it. "Walt," he'd said at last, "if somebody wanted to sell this house without your full say-so, the first thing they'd need to show is that you can't manage it on your own, that you need help a different setup somewhere else." That landed in my gut the way a dropped tool lands on concrete. To make that case, Bert went on, you'd first have to make the man himself look like he can't cope. Make the situation around him read as a problem that needs solving. I held his gaze. "Bert, Eddie is my son." He didn't look away. "I'm aware of that. I'm also telling you what I witnessed, because no one else at this table is going to." We stayed on that porch for another hour. I can't give you a full accounting of what went through me in that time, because parts of it still won't resolve into words. Some piece of me was desperate for Bert to have gotten it wrong. Another piece, the craftsman's piece, the part that had spent 4 decades learning to read what wood was doing, beneath the surface had already concluded he hadn't. That night I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling of the house these hands built, and above me I could hear Eddie and Sonia moving through their room. Something in my chest changed that night. Never fully changed back. Bert's words lodged in me the way a fastener does when it's been driven in at the wrong angle, no immediate failure, but you know the joint won't hold forever. I've turned that Saturday over in my mind more times than I can number. Not hunting for blame, I already know where that search ends. I turn it over because of the seconds. The raw impossible math of how little time stood between what happened and something far worse, and how nearly every one of those seconds came down to me alone. Second Saturday in September, Ohio had shifted into that early fall register, shadow cool, sun warm, the kind of afternoon light that makes the year feel like it's easing toward rest. I'd been at the wood shop since mid-morning, running sandpaper over the back panel of a cabinet I was building, for no reason except that idle hands don't suit me. Came in around 2:30, rinsed off at the kitchen sink. From the living room came the television football pregame, the volume-up analysts talking over each other. Eddie was flat on the sofa, under a throw blanket, the arrangement I'd seen enough Saturdays to recognize as his natural resting state. A half-eaten sleeve of crackers sat open on the coffee table beside him. "Sonia upstairs?" I asked, eyes still on the screen. "Getting ready. We're meeting the Garfields at 6. Caleb's down for a nap." "He was playing in the corner," Eddie said, lifting one hand in the direction of the far end of the room without once looking over. "He's fine." I glanced toward the corner he'd pointed at. Caleb was not there. My eyes went fast the way they go in the shop, when something in a structure doesn't add up, sweeping for the thing out of place. The playmat. Blocks scattered across it. The stuffed bear on its side. Then I caught a sound. Small. The soft, distinct knock of something small and solid against wood. I swung toward the staircase. Caleb was on the third step. He'd pulled himself upright using the side rail, a skill he must have discovered sometime in the past week. News no one had passed along to me. He was leaning at a 40-degree angle already beyond what his legs could compensate for, tipping toward the open air below him. The safety gate at the foot of the stairs was standing open. Eddie. I got out, but my legs had already made the decision without me. 68 years old. Knees that have been unreliable since 2018. No sensible reason to launch myself across a hardwood floor at speed. But a man's body doesn't ask permission when his grandchild is going over a staircase. And I got there in a way I could never have choreographed or repeated. Both arms went around Caleb just as gravity finished winning. He pitched forward and I had him drew him back into my chest. But my own angle and the force behind me had nowhere to go, and I went sideways into the newel post at the stairs base, lower back full force. The sound of something structural absorbing what it was never designed to absorb. The pain that detonated through my spine right then was outside anything in my previous experience. Not the clean sharpness of a cut. This was different, total, radiating from my lower back outward in all directions simultaneously. For roughly 2 seconds I had no sense of where my legs were. Then I was on the floor. Caleb was in my arms, crying hard from the fright. Face buried in my shoulder, his small frame convulsing with the kind of sobs that haven't learned to make noise, yet all shudder and heave. "You're okay," I said. My voice came out, even which I didn't expect. "You're okay, buddy. I've got you. You're okay." My legs were not answering. I heard the sofa cushion release Eddie's weight feet hitting the floor, and then he was at the doorway. Sonia was somewhere on the stairs above, drawn down by the sound of the collision. What happened? Eddie's voice had gone high and taut, not the sound of a man worried about his father, but the sound of adrenaline that's arrived and hasn't found its target yet. 3 strides across the room, and he reached in and pulled Caleb from my hold. Caleb's cries pitched up sharper at being moved. "He's okay," I said again from the floor. The gate was open. He reached the 3rd step. Sonia came down the rest of the stairs and took Caleb from Eddie, pulling the boy against her and making those quick, repetitive, soothing sounds that the situation called for. Caleb began to wind down. "Can someone help me up?" I said. Eddie looked down at me, and I need to say this carefully because the moment was specific. Something complicated crossed his face. Something that flickered toward understanding what had just happened and what it had taken from me. Then, "What did you do? Dad, how did he even get over there?" The pain in my back spiked white at the edges of my vision. I pressed both palms flat on the floor, tried to push myself up. Could not. "Eddie," I said, and I kept every syllable level, which cost me. "I cannot get up from this floor. Call 911. Sonia looked at me, a real look, the first one since she'd come downstairs. Her expression rearranged itself. She passed Caleb to Eddie and went to one knee beside me. "Walter," she said, "can you feel your legs?" "I feel them," I said. "They're just not taking instructions." She got back on her feet and had her phone out. I heard her with the dispatcher. Calm, precise, no wasted words. I'll give her that. I lay on the living room floor, the same floor I'd set down, plank by plank, 43 years back, and I looked at the ceiling and I breathed. Caleb had gone quiet. I could hear the last of his sniffling against Eddie's shoulder, could hear Eddie's voice drop low, cycling through the same soft words. It's okay, buddy. He was fine." That thought rose up through the pain and anchored there like a beam set true. Caleb was fine. Whatever had broken in my back, my grandson was held in his father's arms, and he was fine. That was the only thought I let myself carry on that floor. The ambulance was there in 11 minutes. I counted every one. The physician was Dr. Reyes, a trim man in his late 40s, precise hands, the measured bedside manner of someone who has told people hard things, often enough to have learned the cleanest way through. He walked me through the diagnosis before Eddie and Sonia came through the door, and I was grateful for the timing. Hearing it once alone meant I could be steady when I had to hear it again with them present. Lumbar spinal injury, the lower spine had taken damage that was interrupting the nerve signals to my legs. Not a full severance, he made that clear, not permanent paralysis, but serious enough to require a wheelchair through the recovery, and serious enough that he wasn't prepared to put a time frame on how long that recovery would run. "When will I walk normally again?" I asked. Dr. Reyes met my eyes with the directness of a man who won't soften what he doesn't know. "I can't tell you yet," he said. "Weeks, possibly months. Once the imaging is back, we'll know more. What I need you to hear right now, Mr. Crane, is that this is serious. You're not in worse shape than you are, mainly because of the way your body landed. I told him I went down catching my grandson." He gave a slow nod. "I know." A pause stretched out. "Tomorrow we'll go over everything. Tonight you need to sleep." He'd cleared the doorway maybe 10 minutes before Eddie and Sonia walked in. Caleb had been left with a neighbor. I pieced that together afterward. Eddie pushed through first. Same jeans and flannel from the couch, and his hair had that frantic, worked-over look, like his hands had been in it the whole drive to the hospital. Sonia came in a step behind him, coat folded over her forearm, her face wearing concern so perfectly assembled, I couldn't locate a single raw edge. "Dad." Eddie reached the bed and locked both hands around the rail, the knuckles drained of color. "Dad." "What are they saying, lumbar spinal injury?" I told him. "A wheelchair while things heal, possibly a few months." Something in Eddie's jaw went rigid. His gaze dropped to the rail, then climbed back to my face. "Okay." He said the word coming out, twice overlapping itself. "Okay, we'll work it out." Sonia crossed to the opposite side of the bed. "Naturally we will," she said, warmth fully deployed. "You just tell us what you need, Dad." There was one moment, one still suspended moment, where things could have gone a different direction, where somebody decent could have said something decent. Eddie could have wanted to know if I hurt. Sonia could have asked what the road back would actually look like. 100 different words were available to either of them, and any of those words would have mattered. Instead, Eddie said, "What exactly happened?" "Walk me through it." Something seized in my chest and climbed straight up into my throat. "What happened," I said, choosing each word deliberately, "is that Caleb reached the third step because the safety gate wasn't latched. I saw him tip, and I moved." "How'd he even get that close to the stairs?" Eddie's voice went up a register, the pressure behind it rising. "You were right there in the living room. I was in the kitchen," I said. "I just walked in from the shop." "So, there was nobody watching him," Eddie said. Those words came out scalding and quick, like he'd been keeping them at a boil since the ambulance rolled away. I studied my son's face. 30 inches away, both arms rigid, that rail shaking under the force of his grip, and I could see exactly what his expression was doing. I recognized the move, the reflexive lurch of a scared man, toward the nearest explanation that lets him off the hook. "Eddie," I said. The gate was open. "I was sure it was latched," he said. "I latch it every time." Sonia's voice slid in from across the bed, low and sculpted. "No one's pointing fingers," she said in the precise register of a woman who was pointing every finger she had. "We're just trying to piece together what went wrong so it can't happen again." And Walter, honestly, she let it sit there a beat, tilting her head in that way she had, if you'd simply called for one of us, rather than throwing yourself across the room like that. My back picked that exact second to drive a white-hot spike down through my left hip, and I let the air out through my teeth and sank my head hard into the pillow. "Sonia," I said once the current eased, "I had 2 seconds. That's all I had." I know," she said, her fingers landing on my arm fast, and light a gesture that wore the costume of comfort and felt underneath it like something being entered into a ledger. "We're frightened. We're just really scared for you." I put my eyes on the ceiling. I replayed the feel of Caleb's weight pressed against me. I heard again what my spine had sounded like against that post. I turned over those 11 minutes flat on a hardwood floor. I had laid with my own hands counting the seconds until the ambulance finally arrived. Then I brought my eyes back to Eddie. He'd released the rail, arms hanging now, the burning urgency gone from his face, replaced by something else entirely. Something cooler and harder to pin down. He wasn't studying me with the relief of a son whose father was still breathing. He was studying me the way a man studies a complication he needs to figure out how to handle. That's when the doctor stepped into the doorway for an end-of-shift check. His gaze swept the three of us with the calm economy of a man who has walked into rooms like this one more times than he could count. Something in what he read there sharpened for just a fraction of a second before his expression settled back to neutral. "Mr. Crane," he said, his attention fixed on me alone. "The physical therapy coordinator will come by first thing tomorrow to begin mapping out your recovery. The sooner we get you started once you're stable, the better." "Thank you, doctor," Sonia said, pivoting toward him with the full force of her attention, as though the conversation before he entered had simply been erased. Dr. Reyes did not turn toward Sonia. His eyes stayed on mine. "Rest tonight," he said. "We'll speak in the morning." He was out the door before any of us could add a word. I held my gaze on that empty doorway, after he was gone, turning over the brief sharpening I'd caught in his face when he walked in. A doctor who's logged enough hours learns to read a room without broadcasting what he sees. I had the clear and settled feeling that Dr. Reyes had taken something in and that he meant to hold on to it. Eddie said he'd be back in the morning. Sonia said to phone if anything came up. They walked out together, their steps going quiet down the corridor, and I lay there in the stillness of that room and let the full weight of what had just unfolded settle into me alongside every ache in my body. Not the fall itself. I could make my peace with the fall. What pressed down on me was the choice Eddie had made about which question to lead with. Not, "Dad, are you hurting?" Not, "Dad, thank God you got there in time." What sank into my bones was, "What exactly happened? Walk me through it." Those are the words of a man already laying down the framing for his version. They discharged me on a Wednesday. By Friday, Eddie had put 3 photographs up on Facebook. Bert was the one who told me I have no account of my own on that platform. Never understood the appeal of broadcasting my private life to an audience I could just as easily reach by dialing their number. But Bert does. Bert keeps an eye on Eddie's page because deliberate quiet watchfulness is simply the kind of man Bert has always been. He came by that Saturday morning, holding his phone out in front of him, like evidence wearing the expression he gets when what he's about to show me is something he already knows I won't be glad to see. "I want to be straight with you before I pull this up," Bert said, lowering himself into the chair across from my wheelchair at the kitchen table. I went back and forth on whether to bring this over. "In the end, I figured you had a right to know. Just show me Bert." He flipped the phone to face me. The first photo was me in the wheelchair in the front room, shot from above, and slightly left a considered angle that pulled the morning light through the east window and gave the whole frame a warm, purposeful glow. My head was tilted down towards something in my lap. I hadn't known anyone was shooting. Caption: "Taking care of my dad today. Family always comes first." 92 likes. My stomach fell out from under me. "There's more," I said, because I could see there was. The second shot showed Eddie perched on the near arm of the sofa, body angled forward, elbows resting on his knees, face inclined toward me with every appearance of close caring attention. I seemed to be mid-sentence in the frame. I have zero memory of that picture being taken. Caption: "Dad and I catching up. Grateful for every day." The third was Caleb nestled in my arms. That one was real, a genuine moment from an afternoon Eddie had brought him over, when the baby had grabbed 2 fistfuls of my collar and held on. It was a lovely photograph. Caption: "3 generations. So much love in this house." I sat with that third image a good while. Then I passed the phone back to Bert. "When did he post that last one?" I asked. "Yesterday afternoon," Bert said. 4:17 p.m. What was going on inside this house at 4:17 yesterday afternoon? Bert settled back, crossed his arms, and waited. You tell me. I was sitting in this room by myself, I said. Eddie left for the gym at 3:30. Sonia had taken Caleb over to her mother's. I ate a sandwich alone and had the news on. Bert's jaw went hard. He placed the phone face down on the table with a slow, controlled steadiness that communicated his anger more plainly than any raised voice could have. Walter, he said, keeping his voice even and low. Do you see what your son is doing here? I'm beginning to, I said. He's constructing a public record, Bert said. Every person who scrolls past those pictures walks away thinking he's at your side every single day. He's cast himself as the one keeping everything from falling apart. Bert tapped the back of the phone once with his finger. And you've got no way to push back on it because you're not even on the platform. My hands were lying on the armrests, and I noticed my right hand had pulled itself into a fist without any instruction from me. I opened it back up one finger at a time. That first photo, I said, the one of me by the window. I had no idea he was shooting. No, Bert said. You didn't. What that meant, the full weight of it arrived somewhere deep and cold inside my chest. My own boy had pointed a camera at me in my own home, in my own wheelchair, without my knowledge, and put the image on the internet as proof of what a devoted son he was. The violation was so precise and so strange, it was almost too much to hold together in a single thought. The real kicker, Bert said, and his voice had gone rough, the way it does when his fury is genuine, is that first caption. Family always comes first. He shook his head a hard, quick motion. Walter, he didn't show up to your follow-up appointment on Monday. That landed differently than any physical pain had. The physical pain I'd learned to breathe through, to work around, to carry. This was another variety altogether, the kind that settles behind the breastbone and just stays there. I know, I said. You rescheduled it on your own, Bert said. From that wheelchair. You picked up the phone and made that call yourself. I know Bert. He was at the house, Bert said. His truck was sitting in the driveway. I pressed my lips together and held them there, keeping my face from doing what it wanted to do. Whatever was burning behind my eyes was not going to be given any room. Not with Bert watching. Not with anyone. I had spent 68 years keeping what hurt me inside my chest, where it belonged. That wasn't changing now. You know what the strangest part of all this is? I said once I could trust my voice. The pictures aren't even bad. He's got a decent eye. Bert looked at me a long moment, and then in spite of everything he let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Only you, Walter, he said. Only you would land on that. Well, I told him it's still true. Bert picked up his coffee mug, and we sat at my kitchen table on a Saturday morning, while the house ticked quietly around us. And I thought about the man in those photos, the family always comes first man. And I tried to locate him somewhere inside the son I had raised. He was in there. He had to be. But something had buried him, and I didn't yet understand what. The photographs weren't helping me find him either. What they were doing, and I didn't see the full picture yet, didn't know what was still ahead, was showing me the shape of something being constructed around me. A story. A version. And I was its subject photographed without my consent. I hadn't yet begun to work out what I was going to do about that. That part came later. That night I lay in bed staring up at the ceiling of the room I'd slept in for 40 years, and I felt something shift underneath the grief and the pain and the burning love I still carried for my son, something quieter than any of that. Something that felt for the first time in weeks almost like clarity. Dr. Lena Pratt was a physical therapist at the Akron Rehabilitation Center. A no-nonsense woman in her mid-40s, close-cropped hair, and the kind of direct eye contact that tells you right away she has no interest in softening anything. I took to her from the very first session. On my first day, she handed me a printed schedule, 8 sessions over 6 weeks, Mondays and Thursdays beginning the first week of October. And she said, Mr. Crane, this window matters. The first 6 to 8 weeks after a lumbar injury are when the nervous system is most responsive to treatment. Let this window close and recovery gets significantly harder. Are we clear? We're clear, I said. Good. She smacked the schedule down on the table between us like she was closing a deal. I'll see you Thursday. I got to the first session on Monday and the second on Thursday. The third session the following Monday, Sonia told me the clinic had phoned to cancel. The doctor had an emergency. They'd reschedule, she said. I nodded and said, okay. That was my mistake. The Thursday after, Sonia said they'd called again. A scheduling conflict this time. They'd be in touch, she said. I felt uneasy but talked myself out of it. Clinics are busy, these things happen. It was the Friday of that second week when the unease hardened into something else. Eddie was at work, Sonia was out with Caleb. I was alone in the house and my cell phone rang. The number on the screen said Akron Rehabilitation Center. Mr. Crane said the woman on the line, brisk, a little puzzled. "This is Donna from Dr. Pratt's scheduling office. We're calling to confirm your appointment Monday. We did try to reach you last week, but the person who answered said you wouldn't be coming in. We just wanted to check." My grip on the phone tightened until my knuckles ached. "The person who answered," I said. "On this number, on the home line." "Yes, sir. Tuesday of last week around 10:00 in the morning." I pressed my back into the wheelchair and made myself breathe the way Dr. Pratt had shown me. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Hold the body steady even when the mind is on fire. "I'll be there Monday," I said. "Thank you for the call." I set the phone on the table and held my eyes on it for a long moment, my heart going hard in a way that had nothing to do with my spine. Tuesday of last week, 10 in the morning. I had been right here in this room. Sonia had been in the kitchen. I remembered hearing her in there, the particular rhythm of cabinet doors, the sound of water running. She had answered the home line, and she had told them I wasn't coming. That evening when Sonia came back with Caleb on her hip and a grocery bag over her arm, I watched her move through the kitchen with the same pleasant efficiency she always had, and I thought carefully about how to approach this. I had spent 40 years as a carpenter. I knew that when you suspected something was structurally wrong, you didn't go at it with a hammer. You probed. You listened for the hollow spot. "Sonia," I said from the doorway, "did the rehab clinic call last week?" She lifted the grocery bag onto the counter and turned to face me. Open, relaxed, not so much as a flicker across her eyes. "No," she said clean and simple. "If they'd called, I'd have come to get you right away, Dad. You know that." She turned back to putting things away. The smoothness of the lie, the ease of it, the total absence of hesitation knocked the wind out of me for just a second. Not the anger, the breathlessness, that particular shock of watching someone hold your gaze and say something false in exactly the same voice and with exactly the same face they'd use for the truth. I went back to the front room and lowered myself into the wheelchair, and my hands were shaking not from weakness, but from the work of keeping my outside still, while something tore through my inside. Bert came by the following afternoon without calling ahead, the way he does sometimes, when something has been sitting on him. "You look awful," he said, by way of hello, dropping into the kitchen chair. "Thank you, Bert." "What's going on?" I told him about the call from Donna at the clinic. I told him what Sonia had said when I put the question to her. Bert listened the way he always does, without cutting in, without getting ahead of you, letting you finish the whole thought before he starts forming his. When I was done, he leaned forward, elbows on the table, and said, "Walter, do you have a phone? Only you use, not the house line. Your cell, does anyone else have access to it?" "No," I said. Why, Bert's face settled into something deliberate. "Because if I were trying to slow down someone's recovery," he said, keeping his voice quiet, "the first thing I'd want to do is make sure they missed as much of that critical window as possible. And the simplest way to do that is to cut off the appointments," I said. Bert nodded once, slow and heavy. The room felt different after he'd said it aloud. Not smaller, bigger actually, the way a room gets when you suddenly grasp how much space a truth occupies. "Bert Keaton," I said, and my voice came out rougher than I meant it to. "I have been in this wheelchair for 3 weeks, and in those 3 weeks my son has posted photographs of himself looking after me, photographs taken without my knowledge. What I was about to find out, the full shape of what had been happening right inside my own house, was worse than I had let myself believe. Before I tell you what it cost me to face it, let me ask you this. If someone you loved was quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew? Or would you wait until every piece of proof was in your hands? My daughter-in-law has canceled my physical therapy appointments and looked me in the eye and lied about it. And I stopped, pressed my fist to my sternum where the heat was gathering. "I am working very hard," I said, "not to land on a conclusion I can't walk back from." Bert reached across the table and covered my fist with his hand. "You're not jumping," he said with force behind it. "You're moving forward and you're moving in the right direction." He pulled his hand back. "But Walter, you need to start keeping a record. Everything, dates, times, exact words. Write it down the same day it happens." I looked at him, this 70-year-old man who had brought coffee and straight talk to my kitchen every Saturday for 30 years, who had watched my family from 3 houses down, with the quiet attention of someone who understood that what matters most is usually playing out just beyond the edge of what people let you see. "You think it gets worse from here?" I said. That wasn't really a question. Bert held my eyes without wavering. "I think," he said, choosing the words with care, "that whatever this is, it isn't finished." He was right. He was so completely right that it still stings to think about how clearly he saw it. There are moments that split a life into a before and an after. Not the ones you brace for, not the accident, not the hospital, not the first afternoon you sit in a wheelchair and understand the word temporary no longer applies to you. The moment that divided mine happened on an ordinary Thursday in late October, in my own front room over a glass of ice water. Eddie was at work. Caleb was down for his afternoon nap in the back bedroom. Sonia and I were alone in the house, in that particular quiet that falls over a place when a toddler is asleep and 2 adults have run out of things to say to one another. I was in the wheelchair by the window, my position the spot I'd claimed as mine since coming home, working through the range of motion exercises Dr. Pratt had given me for the sessions I was actually managing to attend. Slow trunk rotations, careful pressure through the hips. It hurt the way useful work hurts a deep functioning ache rather than the sharp wrongness of something tearing. Sonia came into the room, carrying a glass of water ice in it, a sprig of mint balanced on the rim the way she did when she wanted things to look intentional. "You must be thirsty, Dad," she said, voice warm and attentive. "Working so hard over here." "Thank you," I said, and reached for it. She set it on the table beside me instead of placing it in my hand, a small thing, the kind of thing that slides right past you unless you're already watching. Then she stayed. Usually when Sonia brought me something, she was gone before I could finish the thank you. This time she lingered, straightening the throw blanket on the sofa, adjusting a frame on the side table, making small, deliberate movements that kept her present in the room. "How's the pain today?" she asked her back to me. "Manageable," I said. "Dr. Pratt's exercises are helping. They are when I get to do them." She turned at that, a quick glance, just a flash, that I was supposed to read as concern. "I know the scheduling has been a disaster," she said. "I feel awful about it." I picked up the glass. The ice was fresh. Really fresh, the kind that comes straight out of the freezer, cold enough that holding the glass for more than a few seconds made your palm ache. I noticed that. Stored it. "These things happen," I said. Sonia drifted toward the bookshelf on the far side of the room, trailing her fingers along the spines the way people do when they're performing casualness. "Eddie and I have just been so concerned," she said. "Honestly, Dad, we look at you sometimes, and we genuinely can't tell how much you're really dealing with. What's real, and what's—" She paused, hunting for a softer word than the one she'd started toward. Everything in my back went rigid. "What's what I said?" My voice held. 40 years working with my hands had taught me to keep my voice level when the rest of me was doing something different. "We just want to be certain," Sonia said, carefully turning to face me, "that you're getting the right kind of help, that what you're experiencing is being accurately described to the doctors." She crossed toward the table beside my chair, reached past me for something on the shelf above it, and the glass of ice water, full, heavy, cold enough to have come out of the freezer 5 minutes ago, went off the table and poured directly into my lap. Onto my thighs, down my legs. The cold landed like a blow. I sucked in a sharp breath, involuntary, no stopping it, and both legs jerked back in a full reflex, pull away from the shock of it. Sonia stepped back. She looked at my legs. Then she looked at my face, and the warmth, the worry, the carefully maintained performance of the last 10 minutes slid off her expression like water off a sealed board. What was left underneath was flat and hard and entirely unbothered. "You flinched, Dad," she said. Her voice had shifted completely. Soft was gone. Warm was gone. What replaced them was precise and clinical. "And you pulled both legs back." She tilted her head, and the gesture made my skin crawl. "If you truly had no feeling below the waist, the way you've been telling the doctors, how did you do that?" The cold was still radiating upward through my body. My hands had locked onto the armrests so hard the knuckles had gone white. I could feel my heart driving against my ribs, not from fear, but from something hotter and more dangerous than fear. The particular fury of a man who has just been tested in his own house by someone he brought into his family. "Sonia," I said, and my voice came out very quiet in a way that meant the opposite of calm. "That was not an accident." She picked up the empty glass from the floor. She wiped it down with the hem of her sleeve with the same composed efficiency she brought to everything else. Of course it was, she said. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll get you a towel. She walked out. Her steps were steady and unhurried on the hardwood. I sat in that wheelchair with ice water soaking through my clothes and into the cushion, and I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth, the way Dr. Pratt had drilled into me for pain management. I used it now for something Dr. Pratt had never anticipated having to prepare me, for the management of a rage so deep and so cold, it felt almost load-bearing, like something structural you couldn't remove without the whole frame coming down. After a moment, I turned my head and looked out the window. Bert's house 3 doors east, his side yard, his fence line the corner of the shed, where I knew he kept his outdoor camera angled toward the street and toward the front of my property. Toward the window where I was sitting. A thought came through me slowly, the way large things move, not with speed, but with a weight that shifts everything around it. If Bert's camera was pointed at this window, and if Sonia had just done what she had done, right here in front of it in the middle of the afternoon. I looked at the window, I studied the angle. I thought about the geometry, the carpenter's habit of always understanding how one surface relates to another, how sightlines work, where the frame catches the light. Then Sonia came back in with a towel, and her face was warm, again concerned. Again the whole performance restored, as though it had never cracked. "Here you go, Dad," she said softly, holding it out. "I really am so sorry about that." I took the towel, dried my hands first, methodically, one finger at a time. Then I looked up at her. "Thank you, Sonia," I said. "I appreciate it." She smiled and left the room, and I sat very still with the damp towel across my lap, and thought about what Bert's camera might have been watching. That night after Sonia went upstairs and the house settled into its late-night quiet, I did something I had not done in 40 years of carpentry. I stopped trying to repair what was broken and started recording it instead. I opened the notes application on my cell phone, the personal one, the number I had never given to Eddie or Sonia, the one I used for Bert and my brother in West Virginia, and almost nobody else. I dated the entry October 23rd, and then I typed slowly, using the deliberate 2-finger method of a man who learned to type before home computers existed everything that had taken place that afternoon. The glass, the angle of the pour, the exact words Sonia had used, the expression on her face when the warmth left it. The sound of her footsteps walking out, even unhurried, completely unbothered. I typed all of it. Then I went back and added the dates of the canceled therapy appointments, the date Donna from the clinic had called, the exact words Sonia had said when I asked her about it, the date Eddie had photographed me by the window without my knowing, the amount of time he had actually spent in the house on each of the days he'd posted those photographs. By the time I was done, it was past midnight. My back ached from sitting in the wheelchair without proper support, but I didn't move because I wasn't finished. I went into the settings on my phone and found the voice memo application. I set it to record and rested the phone on the small table beside my chair, the same table that Ice Water Glass had occupied that afternoon. I said a few words into it as a test, then played them back. The audio was clean. The phone caught sound from across the room without any trouble. Ohio law, as I'd come to understand it from a conversation with my brother-in-law years earlier, permitted a person to record any conversation they were personally part of, without notifying the other parties. One-party consent, he'd called it. As long as I was present and participating, the recording was legal. From this point forward, I intended to be present and participating in every conversation that took place around me. The following morning, I phoned Bert before he had a chance to come to me. "Can you come over?" I said when he picked up. "Side door now, if you're able." He was there in 8 minutes jacket, still on coffee thermos in hand. He came through the side door and stopped when he read my face. "What happened?" he said, before I'd spoken a word. "Yesterday afternoon," I said. "Bert, I need to ask you something, and I need a straight answer." "Always," Bert said, pulling the kitchen chair out and sitting down. "Your camera," I said, "the one mounted on your shed. What does the angle cover?" Bert set his thermos down with great deliberateness. His eyes sharpened the way they do when he stopped being social and started paying close attention, and the distance between those two versions of Bert is significant. "It covers my side yard," he said slowly, "and roughly 30 feet of the street." Then he stopped. "And the front of your house," he said, "including the window of your front room." Something expanded in my chest, not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but with elements of both running through it. "Yesterday afternoon, around 3:00, I said. "Was the camera recording?" Bert was already on his feet. "It records all the time," he said. "Motion activated, holds 30 days of footage." He had his phone out and an application open, his fingers moving faster than you'd expect from a 70-year-old man. Give me a minute. I watched him scroll. I watched his face change when he found what he was after a particular tightening around the eyes and jaw, the look of a man who is seeing something that makes him angry on behalf of someone he loves. Walter, he said, his voice dropped low and measured the way it goes when he's working to hold himself together. I can see through your window. The angle's not perfect, but he turned the phone toward me. The footage was grainy the way outdoor cameras go in afternoon light, but there was enough. I could make out my front room through the glass. I could see myself in the wheelchair. I could see Sonia move to the table beside me. I could see the glass go over. I could see both my legs snap back from the cold. And I could see, without any possible misreading, Sonia step away and study my legs with an expression that no one watching that footage could mistake for shock or regret. My hands had taken on a fine, furious tremor I couldn't fully bring under control. I pressed them flat against my thighs and breathed. "Save that," I said. "Back it up in multiple places." "Already doing it," Bert said, fingers moving across the screen. 3 locations, my email, my external drive, and a cloud account Eddie doesn't know I have. He looked up at me briefly. "This is what you needed, isn't it?" "It's part of it," I said. "There's more to come." I told him about the voice memo application, about Ohio's one-party consent law, about the notes I had begun keeping, dates, times, exact words. Bert listened with the focused intensity he usually saves for the final innings of a tight game. And when I finished, he sat back and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in a long while. Pride. Clear, uncomplicated, genuine pride. "Walter Crane," he said, "you are 68 years old. You are sitting in a wheelchair, and you were the most dangerous person in this situation." He picked up his thermos and took a long pull. "They have no idea, do they?" "No," I said, "they don't." Bert set the thermos back down and leaned in, elbows on the table, with the look of a man who has made his decision and is not going back. "Then let's make sure it stays that way," he said. "Until you're ready." I nodded, and for the first time since September, what was in my chest wasn't pain, wasn't grief, wasn't the relentless effort of keeping my fury from showing on my face. It was something else entirely. I felt ready. "I want to tell you about a Tuesday afternoon in November, one of those gray, bone-cold Ohio afternoons where the sky presses down low and flat and the trees have shed everything, and there is nothing soft left anywhere in the landscape to rest your eyes on. I want to tell it carefully because what took place inside this house that afternoon is the moment I have turned over in my mind more than almost any other in this entire story. Not because it was the most damaging thing. By November, I had a much clearer sense of what was being done to me. In some ways, the worst had already happened. The canceled appointments, the ice water, the photographs taken of me without my knowledge. What came on that Tuesday was different. It was the thing spoken out loud, the thing that couldn't be walked back. Eddie came home at 4:15 earlier than his usual hour. I heard the truck pull in, heard the side door open and then shut harder than it needed, to the specific sound of a man who has had a bad day and hasn't found his footing yet. He came straight through to the front room without stopping in the kitchen, which told me he hadn't eaten, hadn't poured himself anything, and was not arriving in any condition that was going to make for a good exchange. My phone was in my cardigan pocket, voice memo running. It had been running since 10 that morning, the way it ran every day now, as automatic as making coffee, as unremarkable to me as drawing breath. Eddie dropped onto the sofa and pressed both hands over his face, dragging them down slowly. He had the worn-out look of someone who has been running on anger for hours and is burning through the last of the supply. "Rough day?" I asked. He let his hands fall and looked across the room at me. "Project fell through," he said. "Client walked away. 3 months of work." He shook his head hard the way you do when you're trying to shake water from your ears. 3 months? "I'm sorry," I said. And I meant it. Whatever was being built between us, I was still his father, and watching my son hurting still took something out of me. "Yeah," Eddie said. His eyes moved restlessly around the room, searching for somewhere to put what had nowhere to go. They landed on the wheelchair, stayed there a beat longer than they should have. "You do your exercises today?" he asked. "I did," I said. "Dr. Pratt says you could be pushing harder," he said. The edge in those words had nothing to do with physical therapy, and we both understood that. "She says recovery depends heavily on the effort you put in." I kept my voice even. "Dr. Pratt and I discuss my progress at every session, right?" Eddie came off the sofa abruptly, too much heat in his body to stay seated. He moved toward the window, then turned back to face me. "I'm just saying, Dad, You could work harder at this. You could be out of that chair sooner if you actually wanted to be. The burning started in my chest and climbed toward my throat. I held it down. Eddie, I said quietly, I am doing everything the doctor has prescribed. Are you... He faced me fully now, his voice having moved well past, tired, and into something with heat beneath it. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've gotten pretty comfortable in that chair. Like maybe staying in it is easier than doing the real work. My hands closed around the armrests. My knuckles ached with it, but I held my face still and kept my voice steady because 68 years and more hard conversations than I could count had taught me that the moment you raise your voice is the moment you surrender the record. That chair, I said carefully, is what makes it possible for me to move through this house. I did not choose it. I know you didn't choose it, Eddie said. And now his voice had traveled somewhere I had never heard from him before. A raw, ugly place, the place people retreat to, when exhaustion and fear have eaten through the last of their decency. He looked at the wheelchair, the way you look at something you resent, and he said, but you could do something about it if you tried hard enough. Crawl across the room if you have to. At least that would be trying. Those words fell into the room the way something heavy falls from a height. I felt them arrive. Not in my back, not in my legs, in the center of my chest, deep and sharp and complete. The way a blow lands when it finds the place that was already open. My eyes burned so fast and so hard, I had to fix my gaze on the grain of the hardwood floor to keep anything from spilling over. I was not going to weep in front of my son over words he said on a bad Tuesday. I was not going to give those words that kind of power, but they had power anyway. That is the plain truth of it. Crawl if you have to. My son, the boy I had held in the delivery room, the boy whose hands I had guided across a wood plain on a Saturday morning, the boy I had written $47,000 in checks for every dollar without a word of complaint. My son stood in my living room on a Tuesday afternoon and told me to crawl. A moment after the words were out, Eddie seemed to register what he'd crossed. His jaw went tight. His eyes moved away from the wheelchair and toward the window, and something shifted across his face that I might have read as shame if I'd been inclined toward generosity at that particular moment. I'm going to go change, he said, his voice flattening back out. Sonia's picking up dinner. He moved past me into the hallway. His steps climbed the stairs. The house swallowed the sound of him, and I sat in my chair with the burning still behind my eyes, and the ache still in my chest, and my phone in my cardigan pocket running the whole time. I reached in and touched it with my fingertips. Just touched it, confirmed it was there, warm from sitting against my body all afternoon. Then I brought it out, slowly opened the voice memo, and watched the timer. 43 minutes and 17 seconds of audio from 10 that morning, with somewhere in the middle of it every single word my son had just spoken. I saved it, labeled it November Tuesday, and set it to back up automatically to the cloud account Bert had helped me create. Then I returned the phone to my pocket and looked out at the gray November sky. And I let myself feel, just for a moment, the full weight of what it cost to be this patient, this methodical, this unrelentingly careful, when every part of me wanted to say something that would have felt good for 30 seconds and destroyed everything I was putting together. I didn't say it, I held it. And the holding of it was the hardest work I had done since I hit that staircase in September. There is a particular kind of quiet that comes over a house after midnight. Not the ordinary hush of people at rest, but something deeper and more specific. A silence in which the sounds that remain become strangely loud. The furnace kicking on and shutting off. The refrigerator's low hum from the kitchen. The tick of a floor contracting in the cold. And voices, if anyone is still talking, moving through walls in ways they never do during the daylight hours. It was a Thursday night near the end of November. My back had pulled me awake at 1:45 in the morning, the way it reliably did 2 or 3 nights a week. A deep grinding ache at the base of my spine that no position offered any real relief from, and that required me to sit up and work through the slow breathing until it retreated to something I could carry. I was sitting upright in the dark of my room, both hands flat on my thighs, breathing with deliberate care, when I heard voices from the room directly above me. Eddie and Sonia's bedroom sat right over mine, a feature of the house's layout I had never had cause to think about until I was living in the downstairs room, and in that deep late-night stillness sound carried. I couldn't catch every word, but I caught enough. Sonia's voice came first low and rapid, traveling strangely through the plaster and old wood, the way voices do at 2 in the morning. Dead. Waiting, drowning. Eddie's response was muddier, lower the voice of a man being pushed somewhere he wasn't sure he wanted to go. I caught the words, "He's my father, Beck." Then Sonia again steadier and more deliberate, and certain words rose above the rest with a clarity that cut right through the ceiling, managed care, facility medical documentation, and then delivered with a precision that made me think she wanted the house itself to register it, conservatorship authority over financial decisions. The house. I did not need to hear every sentence to understand what was being drawn up. A carpenter learns early that you don't need to see the entire frame to recognize what's being built. The shape was already plain. Eddie's voice again, flat reluctant, including selling the house. One word back from Sonia, short, certain. Yes, I sat in the dark, pressing my hands hard into my thighs, and felt something move through me that had gone past anger and past grief, and arrived somewhere on the far side of both a cold, clear, terrible understanding. Conservatorship. The word settled into my mind with the precision of a nail-driven flush on the first strike. In Ohio, a conservatorship allows a court-appointed individual to assume legal control over another person's financial affairs when that person is judged incapable of managing them independently. It requires a petition to the probate court, medical evidence of incapacity, and a judge's approval. It exists for people with dementia, with severe cognitive impairment, with a documented inability to handle their own affairs. I was 68 years old with a spinal injury. My mind was as clear as it had ever been. I balanced my own accounts, read my own mail, made every one of my own medical decisions. Any competency evaluation a court ordered would clear me without difficulty, but Sonia did not know that I knew that. She was counting on the wheelchair, on the injury, on the picture of dependence that she and Eddie had been quietly constructing for 2 months, the canceled appointments, the photographs, the careful cultivation of an image of a diminished old man who needed to be managed. My phone was on the nightstand. I reached for it, and what surprised me was how steady my hand was. Not shaking at all, which was something given what was moving through my chest. I opened the voice memo application, pressed record, and set the phone on the flat surface of the nightstand, where it would pick up the best possible audio from the room overhead. Eddie's voice came through the ceiling again, rougher now. If he fights it, he's not going to agree to any of this, Beck. You know what he's like. Sonia's answer came without any pause, and it is the answer I will carry for the rest of my life. Not because it hurt me, though it did, but because of what it told me about exactly how completely she had misjudged the man she was discussing. He's 68 years old, and he's in a wheelchair, she said. What exactly is he going to do? The silence that followed was not the easy silence of two people who have reached the same conclusion. It was the silence of a man who knew his father and was not entirely certain his wife had read this situation correctly. I don't know, Eddie said finally. I don't know. Then trust me, Sonia said. I have thought this through. We move carefully. We document everything, and by spring, we can have this resolved. The house listed, the debts cleared. We start over. The voices went quieter after that, dropping into the lower registers of a more private exchange. I made no effort to hear more. I had heard enough. More than enough. I sat in the dark for a long while after the sound above me went still. The recording ran on the nightstand. The furnace cycled. The old house settled around me, making its familiar sounds, beams and joists and ductwork I had chosen and fitted and put in place myself, surrounding me the way something known and trusted does. What exactly is he going to do? I picked up the phone and sent Bert a text message. 5 words in the text field. We need to talk tomorrow. Bring everything. I put the phone down, dropped into the dark, and sat with what was coming. 40 years swinging a hammer will teach you something about facing hard work. You learn to build under pressure, frost on your breath joints, aching lumber, warped clock running out. A job begun is a job completed. That had always been my standard, and I wasn't about to abandon it now. What was taking shape in my head there in the stillness well past midnight had nothing to do with rage. Rage burns fast and leaves you with nothing to show. What I was drawing on ran deeper, the same bedrock that had seen me through every impossible project I'd ever taken a bid on. Patience, precision, an iron refusal to walk away from anything unfinished. Nearly 3 months had passed since I'd crossed the threshold of Bert's place. Before the accident, stepping through his side door had been as natural as breathing. Now the geometry of it had meaning it hadn't had before. On that Friday morning in early December, he pulled the door wide and moved aside without speaking, and I rolled into his kitchen and felt what I always feel in there, the settled, quiet warmth of a man who has lived alone long enough to make a house genuinely his. 2 mugs were already on the table, steaming the way they had been on countless Saturday mornings over 3 decades. He nudged one across toward me and sank into his chair, and his face was freighted with something he'd been carrying since the moment my message hit his phone the previous night. "Talk to me," I said. Bert gripped his mug in both hands and met my eyes with the level, unblinking steadiness of a man who has resolved to hold nothing back. "Walter," he said, "I've had my eye on your house for quite a while. Not for any unsettling reason, more the way you absorb a neighbor's rhythms when the years have made their routines as familiar as your own. I know what time your lights come on. I know whether Eddie's truck is sitting in your driveway or not. There are things I should have brought to you earlier, and I'm bringing them now." "Then say them," I told him. Bert exhaled. Something shifted in Eddie about 18 months back. Not a slow drift, a definite break. I could date it, almost. The change showed up in the way he'd pull into your driveway and then study the house before going inside. Before that point, he'd glance at the door the way any man glances at the door to his father's house. Afterward, he was reading the place roofline foundation where the lot ended. Bert's jaw set hard, the way a buyer's agent reads a listing. The coffee was burning hot in my grip, and I focused on that heat to keep myself level. "You stayed quiet," I said. "Not blame, just the plain fact of it." "There was nothing solid I could hand you," Bert said, his voice going rough with guilt. I knew well enough to name. A gut feeling isn't something you bring to a man's door. You can't say to your neighbor something about the way your son eyes your property is wrong. He shook his head sharply. "I should have worked out a way to say it anyway. That's something I'll carry. Walter, let me get through this," he said, firm but even. "There's more to it, and you need the full picture." His hand went to the inner pocket of his jacket and came back with a folded sheet. He smoothed it flat on the table. I let it sit there and looked at it without picking it up. "That man in the suit," Bert said. "Back in August, I mentioned I'd gotten his plate." He tapped the paper. I ran it down. "Goes by Ray Colwell. Licensed agent, works out of a brokerage on Merriman Road." I rang them up, told the woman who answered that I was a neighbor, thinking about listing, and had spotted one of their people in the neighborhood. She confirmed Ray Colwell had been working our zip code. Bert's finger came down flat on the paper. Then I pulled his active listings. 1 pending sale in our zip code that quarter. The address checks out 2 blocks over, nothing unusual. But when I matched the day he was parked in front of your house against his records, Bert's voice went tight and controlled the way it goes when he is furious and managing it. He had no business on our street that day. None at all. He was there for your property and nothing else. My mouth had gone dry as chalk. I lifted the coffee and swallowed without registering the taste. "Eddie called him," I said. "Eddie called him." Bert said it back to me like a nail being set. "I have no way to prove what passed between them, but I can prove that man was standing at your property, making notes in August, a full month ahead of your accident, with no legitimate professional reason to be anywhere near it." He moved the paper across until it was in front of me. The name, the license number, the brokerage, all documented. I took it from the table. "Ray Colwell, Akron Residential Group. License number, clearly printed." My hands were threatening to shake, and I denied them the satisfaction. "There's something else," Bert said, and his tone landed differently enough that I set the paper down and gave him my full attention. His eyes were glistening, not tears exactly. Bert Keaton isn't a man who comes apart easily. But this was that particular brightness that lives in a man's face when something enormous is pressing against the inside of his chest, and he is holding the lid on through sheer will. "Walter," he said, "I have to tell you what I've seen you do for those people, because I'm not sure you've ever stopped to understand how plain it's been from where I stand." He steadied himself with a breath. "I've watched you cover costs that were never legitimately yours. 2 full summers you put into fixing Eddie's house after that contractor left the job in ruins. Work Eddie should have funded himself, but couldn't pull together the money for. I watched Sonia cruise past your driveway 3-4 times every week, without once turning in while you were out, clearing your own walk last January. 1 arm doing the work of 2 in the cold." His voice gave a small fracture on those last words, and he shut his mouth tight and held it until the moment passed. "I watched you give every morning 1.5 years of mornings to raising that little boy, because that's what the situation required of you. And I never saw, not a single solitary time, Walter, either one of them leave so much as a card in your mailbox." Something fierce and sudden lit up behind my eyes, and I hadn't seen it coming at all. I pressed my lips together, fixed my gaze on the mug, and breathed through it the way you breathe through pain, steadily, deliberately, until it backs down. Bert, I got out. Walter, you were the one holding this family up. Bert said the words coming out, stripped bare and certain, for years. The only explanation I can land on, the only one that doesn't make me lose my mind, is that when people have been carried long enough, they stop registering that their feet aren't touching the ground. He stretched his arm across the table and rested his hand on the surface between us, not reaching for me, just planting it there like something anchored. You were never what weighed them down, Walter. You were what they were standing on. Whatever I'd been holding back gave way before I could catch it. One moment, one track of heat moving down my face, gone before it became anything I couldn't manage. No shame in it. 30 years of Saturday mornings in this kitchen earns a man that much. All right, I said, once I was sure of my voice. All right. I lifted the paper bearing Ray Colwell's name. Now, let's talk about what comes next. Bert sat up straighter, wrapped his hand around the mug, and the glistening in his eyes retreated back into the locked-in, purposeful steadiness I had leaned on since 1988. We go see a lawyer, he said. Chet Dunning had spent 26 years practicing family and estate law in Akron. Bert knew him because he'd hired him once to settle a boundary dispute with a former neighbor, and had called him a man who cut straight to what mattered without burning your time. His office occupied the third floor of a downtown building on South Main Street, a no-nonsense space lined floor to ceiling with shelves of case volumes, a desk that announced function rather than status. He shook my hand without turning the wheelchair into an occasion, waved Bert toward the second chair, and settled across from both of us with a legal pad in yellow and a pen, and the full attention of a man with nothing else on his mind. Mr. Keaton tells me there's a situation, he said. I told him there was. All of it in sequence from the beginning. The man in the suit back in August, the ice water, the canceled therapy sessions, and the exchange I'd captured through the ceiling 2 nights prior. I laid it out the way you describe a structural failure to a fellow tradesman ordered exact nothing extra. Chet Dunning kept writing the whole time, pausing occasionally for a single question, but mostly giving me the room to put the complete picture in front of him before he weighed in. When I reached the end, he set the pen down and spent a moment looking over what he'd written. The conservatorship angle your daughter-in-law described, he said would require her and your son to file a petition with Summit County Probate Court and put forward medical evidence demonstrating you lack the capacity to handle your own financial affairs. Given that you are plainly competent in directing your own medical care with no cognitive impairment anywhere on record, he looked up and held my gaze. That petition would collapse. A competency evaluation would put the matter to rest without breaking a sweat. She is badly misjudged where the legal bar sits. She doesn't know what I know. I said that plainly. Chet offered the faint, dry half-smile of a lawyer who has watched a great many people overestimate their hand. Now, what you've brought me is solid for establishing a pattern. The recordings, the documented therapy, cancellations, the footage of the ice water. What would give this considerably more weight? He tapped his pen against the legal pad. Anything bearing directly on the accident itself, the event that started all of this. If there's any record of what actually took place on that staircase, that changes everything. There might be, I said. Bert looked over at me. I hadn't mentioned the camera to him yet. We put a camera in at the top of the stairs roughly 3 years ago, I said. There had been a break-in 2 houses since, and we mounted a small unit in the upper corner of the newel post. It writes to an SD card on a continuous loop. After the first year passed without incident, it drifted out of my awareness the way anything does, in a house you've long since stopped seeing clearly. It faded the same way the smoke detector fades present, but not thought about. It was only now across a desk from a lawyer that it surfaced again. I hesitated. I have no way of knowing whether the footage is still on that card or whether it's been cycled over. Bert made a sound that landed somewhere between a sharp breath and the start of a word. His hand came down hard and flat on the arm of his chair with an audible crack. Walter Crane. He said, his voice strained with the effort of not shouting. Why are we only hearing about this now? Because I forgot it existed, I said. I put it up and never had cause to look at it, and it stopped registering. Chet Dunning had gone very still, the stillness of a man whose professional instincts have just snapped to attention. If that footage is intact and captures what happened the day of the accident, he said, choosing each word carefully, it would be the cornerstone of everything else you've described. The other evidence maps out a pattern of behavior. That footage would establish the truth of where it all began. He leaned forward across the desk. Mr. Crane, I'd strongly advise you to go home today and pull that card. Bert drove me home at a speed that suggested he had forgotten there were speed limits. He had the wheelchair out of the trunk before I'd finished getting my seatbelt unclipped, and we went in through the side door together, and he stood at the foot of the stairs, eyes moving up toward the newel post, with the look of a man trying to will something into existence. Upper corner, I said. Small black unit roughly the size of a matchbox. Bert climbed the first 3 steps and looked, and then something changed in his whole frame. His shoulders came down, his chin lifted, and when he turned back to face me, his expression held a brightness I hadn't seen since the day his grandson came into the world. It's there, he said. Walter, it's still there. He came back down, and we got the unit free from its mount. Bert's hands were steadier than mine for that work, and I wasn't too proud to stand aside and let them be. He settled on the second step, with his laptop pulled from his bag, slid the card in, and we sat with it while the drive loaded up. The files reached back 11 weeks. The date of the accident was in there. Bert opened the file, and we watched it together, heads close to his screen. Bert with the laptop balanced across his knees, me leaning forward in the wheelchair until my back voiced its objection, and I eased back. The image was clear. Timestamp burned into the corner. September, 6:15 in the afternoon. The camera's angle swept the base of the stairs and the slice of the living room visible from that position. We watched Eddie on the sofa. We watched him stand and cross toward the kitchen, passing the gate at the bottom of the stairs. We watched the gate jostled by, his passing drift slowly to a position that looked almost closed but wasn't latched. We watched Caleb in the edge of the frame, notice the gap, and set off toward it with the lurching, purposeful movement of a toddler who has spotted something worth investigating. We watched me come through from the kitchen doorway, take in the situation, and move. The footage showed exactly 4 seconds between my seeing Caleb and my reaching him. 4 seconds in which Eddie had not yet turned around. 4 seconds in which Sonia had not yet appeared at the top of the stairs. 4 seconds that were entirely mine and my grandson's, and the instinct that fired before there was any room for thought. Bert closed the laptop slowly. He pressed both palms flat against the lid. His jaw was working the way it does when he's wrestling something down inside his chest. Back it up, I said. Every copy we can make, Bert said, his voice thick and uneven. He opened the laptop again and started the backup without another word. I sat in my wheelchair at the base of the stairs in the house I had built and looked up at the spot where the camera had been, and something released in my chest. Not the grief, not the ache, the particular tension of a man who has been holding an unwitnessed truth alone for months. Someone had seen it after all. It had been right there the whole time, sitting quietly in a matchbox-sized device, wedged in the corner of a newel post, holding the facts the way honest materials hold a load, without complaint, without announcement, simply doing the work they were made to do. I looked over at Bert. His eyes were brighter even than before, and this time he made no move to contain it. That's everything he said, his voice rough with something he wasn't trying to name anymore. Walter, that is everything. My father had a saying, a man who hasn't put his affairs in order has already made a choice. He just hasn't admitted it yet. I had heard those words so many times coming up that they had become part of the way, I think the same way a favorite tool becomes part of your hand. You don't deliberate over reaching for it, you just reach. I had put my affairs in order 4 years ago. Eddie had never thought to ask. Chet Dunning's office on the second visit carried a different feeling than the first, less like a consultation, and more like a closing, the satisfying finality of a job reaching its last stage. Bert drove me downtown and sat in the lobby with his thermos and his phone, and I rode up alone and settled across from Chet, with the documents laid out between us. The trust structure is straightforward, Chet said, walking the papers toward me, one section at a time. The revocable living trust places the house and your financial assets under trust ownership during your lifetime. You remain the trustee, meaning you control everything exactly as you do now. If you pass away, or if you become genuinely incapacitated, as determined by 2 independent physicians, the successor trustee steps in. He indicated the name on the page. Bert Keaton, as you requested. Does Bert know? I said. We talked it through last week. Chet gave a short nod. Caleb Crane is named as primary beneficiary. The house transfers to him when he reaches 25. Until that point, the successor trustee manages the asset on his behalf. He looked across at me. Eddie Crane has no authority over any asset held within this trust. He cannot sell, mortgage, or transfer anything without trustee approval. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady and unhurried, the way it gets when you've worked a thing through completely before you touch it. What about their conservatorship petition, I asked. A petition to Summit County Probate Court demands clear and convincing evidence of incapacity, Chet said. You are cogent and managing your own medical and financial decisions, and this trust is itself evidence of sophisticated estate planning. Any judge reviewing that petition alongside this document, he let that hang there without finishing it. I signed where he indicated 3 signatures, 2 sets of initials. The pen moved across the page with a finality that felt in the best possible way, like driving the last nail into a finished frame. Chet gathered the signed pages and tapped them square against the desktop. I'll file these today, he said. And Mr. Crane. He paused, wearing the measured look of a man who doesn't editorialize often. I've been doing this for 26 years. What you've put together here is comprehensive. Whatever comes next, you are not walking into it unprepared. I never walk into anything unprepared, I said. The corner of his mouth shifted just slightly. No, he said. I can see that. Bert was waiting at the elevator's base with his thermos in one hand and his phone in the other. When the doors parted and he caught my expression, the tension went out of his whole body in a wave of relief, so plain I almost smiled at it. Done, he said. Done, I said. He hit me once on the shoulder, hard the way men do when feeling outpaces language, and we pushed through to the parking lot, where the December air cut clean and cold against my face, sharper and fresher than anything I'd drawn into my lungs in months. We were nearly back to the house when my cell went off. An unfamiliar number, local area code. I picked up. Mr. Crane, a man's voice, middle-aged, careful around the edges. My name is Ray Colwell. I'm a real estate agent with Akron Residential Group. A pause. I think we need to talk. My grip tightened on the phone. Bert glanced over from behind the wheel, reading me the way he'd been reading me for 30 years. I'm listening, I said. I was contacted by your son in August, Ray Colwell said, and his voice carried the quality of a man doing something that cost him something. He asked me to come take a look at a property, your property. I did that, and then I followed the routine I always follow before I take a listing. I researched the property and the people behind it. Another pause. I looked you up, Mr. Crane. I found your name in a community profile from around 15 years back. You donated materials and labor to rebuild a youth center on Copley Road after a fire. I remembered that. A long July weekend, a crew of volunteers, plywood and drywall, and enough coffee to float a boat. My father bought lumber from a small yard on Tallmadge Avenue for 30 years. Ray Colwell said the man who ran that yard was the same man who organized that youth center rebuild. He spoke about Walter Crane for years afterward. His voice dropped a register. I'm not going to list your house without your knowledge and consent, Mr. Crane. I should have said that to your son back in August, and I didn't, and I'm calling you now because I should have called you then. The burning rushed back behind my eyes, fast, fierce, and entirely without warning. I pressed my thumb and forefinger to the bridge of my nose and breathed through it. Why are you calling now? I asked once I had my voice under control. Because I came past your house this morning, Ray Colwell said, simply. Your neighbor, older fellow, gray jacket, was helping you up the front walk, and I thought, that man deserves to know where he stands. Bert pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. He sat watching me with the quiet attention of someone who can read the shape of a whole conversation from one end of a phone call. I thanked Ray Colwell. I told him the call meant more than I could put into words. Then I hung up and sat in Bert's car in my own driveway in the cold December afternoon. And I let the weight of 40 years of showing up for my community, for my son, for anyone who needed what I knew how to give, settle around me like something that had been there all along, waiting for me to finally stop resisting it. Good call, Bert asked. Unexpected one, I said. The good kind. Bert looked at me for a beat. Then he gave a single slow nod, the nod of a man who has lived long enough to know that the world occasionally, without warning, gives something back. I did not set in motion what happened the week before Christmas. I want to be clear about that because precision matters to me, and because any temptation to take credit for what unraveled that week is one I intend to walk away from. The truth is that a story built entirely on performance will eventually find an audience, and that audience will eventually ask questions the performer can't answer. What came apart that week came apart on its own. I only watched. It began with a phone call from my brother Dale on the Monday before Christmas. Dale is 4 years older than me, lives outside Columbus, and calls on a schedule so reliable you could set a watch by it, first Sunday of every month, 7 in the evening, never shorter than 20 minutes. When his name showed up on my phone on a Monday afternoon, I knew before I answered that something had shifted. "Walter?" Dale said in the voice of a man selecting each word with deliberate care. "I need to ask you something straight, and I need you to answer me the same way always." I said I've been seeing Eddie's posts on Facebook. Dale said the photographs of you, the captions. A pause. "But when I tried to reach you last week on the house number, a woman answered and told me you were resting and couldn't come to the phone." My jaw clenched so hard I felt it in my back teeth. "I wasn't resting," I said. "No," Dale said. "I didn't figure you were." His voice took on a rougher edge, the one that surfaces when Dale is angry and working to keep it on a leash. "Walter, are you all right in there? Because those posts read one way, and you sound another way entirely. I'm better than I've been in months," I said, and I meant it. "And Dale, I need to fill you in on some things, but first I need you to get Connie on the line." A short silence. "Then she's right here," Dale said. "She came over this afternoon. We'd already been talking about you. The three of us hadn't shared a call in 2 years. Connie's voice came in my older sister, 63 sharp as she had ever been, and she said it right away. Eddie texted me 3 weeks ago asking about power of attorney procedures. He said it was for planning purposes. Connie's voice was clipped and precise. I hadn't replied because something about it felt off. "Tell me I was right to stay quiet." "You were right," I said. I heard Connie make a sound that was equal parts relief and fury, a short controlled exhale through the nose that I had known since childhood, and that always meant she was about 2 sentences from saying something very direct. "Tell us everything," Dale said. I gave them the outline, not all of it. Not the recordings, not the footage, not Chet Dunning and the signed trust documents, but enough. The accident, the hospital, the canceled appointments, the photographs, the conversation I'd picked up through the ceiling. Dale went quieter as I talked, which with Dale means the anger is building. Connie grew more precise, pressing for specific dates, specific wording, the kind of focused questions she has been asking since she was 12 years old, and has never stopped. When I finished, Connie said without a moment's pause, "I'm going to go back through everything Eddie has sent the family over the last 6 months. Every text, every post, every photograph, and then I'm going to make some calls." "Connie," I started. "Walter," she said, with the affectionate firmness she had spent 6 decades perfecting as my older sister. "You've been carrying all of this alone for 3 months. Let somebody else hold something for 5 minutes." I pressed my lips together against what rose in my throat at that. "Okay," I said. "Dale said I'm coming up after Christmas. Don't try to talk me out of it. I'm not," I said. What happened over the next 4 days I know only in part from what I witnessed directly and in part from what Bert pieced together afterward. Because the thing moved through channels I wasn't inside. Connie made her calls. Dale put a message in the family group text, a thread that reached aunts, cousins, and various Crane relatives I saw at holidays and funerals, asking simply whether anyone had noticed that Walter's direct number seemed to have changed and whether anyone had actually spoken to him lately, rather than hearing about him through Eddie's posts. The replies came in over 2 days. Most landed in the same general neighborhood. "No, actually, I haven't spoken to Walter directly in a while." Several people noted that Eddie had been the one passing along updates. One cousin mentioned that Eddie had called her in October, asking what she knew about property values in our zip code. Eddie felt it before he understood it. I could see that in him that week, a new restlessness, a watchfulness that hadn't been there before. He checked his phone more often. He and Sonia had 2 conversations in the kitchen that cut off abruptly when I came in, sharper and faster than the usual stopping, with something close to panic running just below the surface of the performance. On the Wednesday before Christmas, Eddie came into the front room where I was working through my exercises and stood in the doorway with his hands shoved into his pockets and his jaw set in the way that meant he was working himself up to something. "Has Uncle Dale been in touch with you?" he asked. "Dale phones every month without fail." I said, keeping my eyes on the exercise. "He's my brother." "People are asking questions," Eddie said. Something in his voice had started to fray the particular sound of a man whose story is no longer holding together at the seams. "In the family group, about you, about things." "What sorts of things?" I said, lifting my gaze to hold his. Eddie pulled his hands free of his pockets and dragged one through his hair, a tell I had known since he was 16-1 that had never changed its meaning. He was shaken and working hard to look like he wasn't. Just, I don't know, whether you're doing okay, whether you need anything. The expression on his face had shed the performance and turned into something rawer, more uncertain. Did you say something to them, Dad? I gave my brother and sister an honest account of how things have been, I said. Same as I always do. Eddie's jaw moved. His eyes went to the floor, then came back to me, and inside them was something I hadn't glimpsed in a long time, the specific discomfort of a man who knows underneath all his rationalizations that he has behaved badly and is only now beginning to grasp the full scope of it. Right, he said. All the color had gone out of his voice. Okay? He turned and walked back down the hall, his steps heavier than they should have been. That evening I sat in the front room and heard Eddie and Sonia going at it in the kitchen. Not words tone, cutting accusatory, the noise of two people who have been aimed at the same target starting to swing toward each other. I had never heard that register from them before, and I felt with the quiet satisfaction of a man who has stood back and waited for a poorly built thing to betray itself, that the structure they had raised between them had at last encountered a load it was not built for. Sonia took Caleb to her mother's house on the evening of December 22nd. A different silence fell over the house after that. Not the wired, performance-heavy kind I'd been living inside for months. Something flatter and emptier, just two men and the hum of the furnace and the last winter light bleeding orange through the front glass. Eddie walked into the front room and settled on the sofa. He'd left his phone somewhere else. That told me more than any words would have. We sat without speaking. Then Eddie turned his attention to the wheelchair. Not a glance, a genuine look, the kind a man gives something when it is costing him to look at it, and said, "Does it hurt? I don't mean the injury, the chair itself. Does it hurt to sit in it?" Something squeezed tight in my chest. 3 months had gone by. Nobody had asked me that. I never once asked you that. The last word cracked a little, and he pressed his lips together and pulled himself back from the edge. I don't understand why I never asked. I think you understand perfectly well, I said, keeping my voice low. Eddie put his elbows on his knees and bent forward, staring at the floor between his feet. A fine tremor was working through his hands, and he wasn't making any attempt to stop it. That afternoon, he said, when I heard you fall, I came through the door and found you down on the floor with Caleb, and I understood immediately. I understood that you had gone for him, because I wasn't there, because I was sitting on that sofa, doing nothing. His voice cracked and gave way. I made it to the hospital, and I listened to myself say those things to you, and I could not stop myself. I couldn't stop, because stopping meant you'd have had to reckon with what you didn't do, I said. Eddie's eyes went wet. He left them that way. He sat with tears tracing lines down his face, his hands unsteady in his lap, and looked at me with the stripped open face of a man who has exhausted every last reserve of pretense. Every single time I see that chair, he said, I'm back in that afternoon. Me on the sofa, you on the floor. His voice went down to nearly nothing. I'm sorry, Dad. For the chair, for the things I said, for the whole of it. I studied my son, this man of 40, folded and caved in on himself, on my sofa, looking like the little boy who used to pad into my workshop in his pajamas, and I felt love and grief and cold fury layered so tight inside my chest that I could not find the edges of any one of them. I know that I said, but Eddie, sorry for one sentence is not the same thing as accounting for everything else. Tomorrow that accounting happens. Eddie drew his hand across his face. His jaw tightened, not in resistance, but in the dull acceptance of a man who has already seen what is coming and knows he can't outrun it. Okay? He said. Nothing more than that. Okay. I told everyone to be there on the afternoon of December 23rd, not Christmas Day. Whatever was going to be said, I didn't want it braided into a holiday that people would have to live with for the rest of their lives. Dale and Connie came up from Columbus. Bert took a chair near the door. Eddie and Sonia were on the sofa. Sonia rigid and composed, Eddie with his palms pressed flat against his thighs, his eyes already weighted down by what the night before had cost him. I didn't lead with an accusation. I led with a question. Eddie, I said, do you remember why I built this house? His voice came out scraped and rough. For the family? For the family, I said. Yes. I laid my phone on the table and hit play. Eddie's voice came out of the speaker and filled every corner of the room. Crawl if you have to. Each word landing clean and merciless in the afternoon stillness. Connie put her hand over her mouth. Dale's jaw locked. Sonia moved quickly. That was taken completely out of context. Sonia. One word from me. She went still. Bert turned his laptop so the screen faced the room. The staircase footage began to play. Caleb at the third step, Eddie on the sofa, Walter moving across the room in 4 seconds while nobody else stirred. Dale made a sound deep in his throat. Connie's eyes filled and overflowed, tears falling as she watched. Then I played the ceiling recording. Sonia's voice came through the speaker level, certain deliberate. He's 68 years old, and he's in a wheelchair. What exactly is he going to do? The room held its breath. Even the furnace sounded loud in that silence. Sonia broke. She turned on Eddie, her voice pitching up and going sharp. "You were the one who left the gate open. You told me you'd checked it." Eddie flinched back from her as though she'd shoved him. "You're the one who set up the whole conversation with the agent. This entire thing was your doing. Don't you dare put this on me." Dale's voice came down like a mallet striking timber. They both went silent. I laid the paper with Ray Colwell's name on the table. The trust documents went beside it. The sheet listing 40 beverages worth $1,000 in dates and amounts went beside that. Then I looked at my son. "You didn't lose a weak father. You lost the one person in this house," I said, "who was always in your corner even long after you'd stopped deserving it." My voice didn't waver. I had been steadying myself toward this moment for months. That is finished now. Not out of hatred, but because I have finally learned to value myself enough to walk away. Sonia got to her feet and left the room without meeting anyone's eyes. Her steps went across the porch and the front door shut behind her. Eddie made no move to follow. He stayed on that sofa face, buried in his hands, shoulders working, weeping the way a man weeps when there is no corner left to retreat to, without sound, without composure, without a single thing remaining to shield himself with. Bert rested his hand on my shoulder, just for a moment. "If you've stayed with me this far, I want to say thank you. Not just for listening, but for letting this story mean something." Looking back on everything that happened, the fall, the ice water, the recordings, the lawyer's office that December afternoon in my own living room, I understand now what it actually cost me. It cost me the version of my son I had been trying to protect for years. The one I kept making excuses for. Letting go of that illusion was the hardest thing I have ever done. But I believe God does not waste a man's suffering. I believe the truth that camera held in that little matchbox on the newel post was not an accident. It was waiting there until I was ready to use it. Here is what I want to leave with you. If someone is managing your image without your knowledge, that is not love, it is control. Pay attention to who speaks for you when you are not in the room. Keep a record, dates, times, exact words written down the same day. Memory is not enough when the stakes are this high. An apology for one act is not an accounting for a pattern. Know the difference before you decide what forgiveness looks like. And if you are a person in the second half of life feeling like a burden in your own home, you are not the burden. You may be the very floor they are standing on. This is a family revenge story that I hope reaches every adult's 50-plus person who has been made to feel small by the people closest to them. You deserve better. And it is not too late to build it. If this story moved you, please leave a thought in the comments. I read them. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories so you don't miss what comes next. Thank you for being here. Until next time, take care of yourself.